Good morning. Welcome to our 258th session of our Right and Left program. I am Patty Haskins. Our panelists today are Bryan Laubaugh,
Right.
Tom Finley, Sue Hanlon, and myself. And our subject today is DEI, its positives and negatives. Bryan, DEI was installed at many American organizations as a partial remedy to the damage done to the hopes and dreams of many people due to a pattern of historic discrimination. What impact do you think it has had?
Well, seeing that a fair amount of the organizations that put DEI departments in place are unwinding those departments, I'm kind of wondering if it had any real lasting effect. For me, it seemed to be an overlay to preference-based hiring, quota-based hiring. It just expanded the definition, as far as I could see, of who were victims or who were in these discriminated classes. So universities, larger companies, a lot of news organizations, newspapers put in place DEI departments. It's diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm struggling to find a lot of good things about it. I mean, it was other than spending a lot of money and putting a lot of people through DEI compliance seminars. I wonder if it didn't just sort of heighten some anxiety for people as to whether or not they were creating microaggressions and being considered out of step with an organization. I have noticed that there are certain things that are good with it, as far as you want to be inclusive, you want to include everybody in your organization. But when companies have to go out with their DEI matrix and hire people to fill those spots that belong to that particular group of people, I'm wondering if we really get the best people. And I think I've said this plenty of times before. I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I will again. I want the best possible person flying that airplane. I want the best possible person in that operating room. I don't particularly care what race, creed, color, gender. I want the best possible person. And when we take out merit-based advancement and merit-based a merit-based type of the word skipped me. But if we take that out and we're just trying to plug in people, depending upon how diverse you want to make your organization, I'm not sure we get what we really want. And so I think it's probably good that companies are now beginning to back off of that and really reevaluate the efficacy of these DEI programs. I'm interested in hearing what other people have to say. I know Susan came from a university environment. I'm sure there was plenty of DEI. I'm interested in hearing about that. In my little office here, it's just me and my back office, so I'm not sure how diverse I can get. I'm just an old white guy trying to do my best to stay ahead of the curve. So that's probably pretty much what I have to say about it so far.
Tom, what do you have to say? You worked for a large company.
Rubbermaid?
Yes.
Yes. And just to put a perspective on this, Rubbermaid was $250,000 in revenue And I introduced the hiring process that included intelligence measurements. Anyway, 20 years later, Rubbermaid was $2 billion. So you can imagine the staffing of executives that took place and whatever. But the tool used was intelligence testing. That is, you did the defining of the job and what was needed in the way of skills and the talent, and you look for the people. But when you get down to the last 3 or 4 people, and then you said, let's test the intelligence. And was that factor that we worried more about than the job descriptions and all of the things connected with the hiring process. But the proof of the pudding is the application of the intelligence testing raised the IQ level of the whole organization such that was the outcome. $2 billion in 20 years from 250 million is quite a jump and a leap. And it related to the establishment of the smartest people we could find. So if this tool is trying to get to that kind of thing, it's ill-defined. It's useless because those jobs are changing all the time. And how do you keep up with change with the way that is structured right now? It was my first question that came to my mind. So that's where I'm coming from. It's a useless tool.
When this was put into place, I think it was like 20 years ago, one of the reasons that it was done was to ensure that subtle biases or unknown biases that we may have would not come into play in the hiring of employees, i.e., you're not giving a person a job just because of their race or their creed or their disability, but you are opening up those positions for those people so that they will be considered. And then if they are the best candidate, you will take them, not based upon a bias. Do you agree with that, or do you see any value in that, Tom?
I'm going to say again, if the most important thing to do is to define the job and the skills that are needed in it accurately. And then what tools do you need to get the brightest, smartest people who match that as closely as you can and make that the basis of your hiring process? So intelligence always enters the picture. We want the brightest people we can get.
Absolutely.
Yeah, see? And so there it is at the top of the list. And there are a lot of other things following that, and the way of knowledge and that sort of thing. But it's right at the top. So what influence? Now, let me ask that question another way. If we had a way of finding out how many companies in the country who are successful are using intelligence testing, I wonder what we'd find as the number of people being tested on their intelligence basis.
Interesting.
Yeah, I can tell you what it did for Rubbermaid. $2 billion in 20 years.
Susan, what are your thoughts on this subject?
I'm sorry, I was muted. One thing I'll respond to is what Tom asked. He wondered how many companies are still using cognitive ability tests. And, this was one of my areas of expertise and research. And although he is correct that cognitive ability is the #1 predictor of success, job performance, many companies don't use cognitive ability tests because they've been shown to have bias. And so they unintentionally, but still systematically discriminate against non-white test takers. And so while they are a great tool, companies have gotten afraid to use them. And I will also say, though, they are much better than they used to be, and researchers have worked very hard to get the bias out of the tests. But it's just like aptitude tests, just, like SATs and ACTs. Those have been shown to have, racial and non-majority group biases. So I'll leave that there. And then I'll go back to, what Bryan talked about, my experience at the university. So we were there, at a public university, there's a huge DEI initiative. And while I will say that, and I was a hiring manager, and in academia, actually, everybody's a hiring manager because you get hired by committees, but which are made up of faculty and staff. I made a lot of hires. I can't ever say that I was forced to hire anyone just on the basis of their, their ethnicity, their race, their religion, anything like that. However, we were forced to include people from non-majority groups in the pool. And and we were also forced to go to great lengths to advertise positions in places where minority groups would be more likely to see them. While that added expense and it added time, it did bring us some hires that we would not have made. And I do have to say that, especially in education, it's good for a student to have a few professors that look like him or her. And I'll pick up on the her, because being in the business school, it's very male dominated. And I myself, inclusion, equity, diversity, that all includes females versus males also, not just race. I was the only female in the room a lot of times. And it's not easy. And not that I'm giving myself credit, but being the only female might not be as hard as being the only Black or the only, some other non-minority group. But it's not an easy thing to do, to be the only one. And so the whole thing is uncomfortable. I think Bryan started off with the impact is, and I do agree that the diversity training makes people uncomfortable. It makes you worried about the words you use and everything else. Racism is uncomfortable. Gender inequity is uncomfortable. It's all uncomfortable. And I don't know that there's a comfortable way to change things, because I don't think it would happen on its own. But it feels artificial. It feels forced. It's not natural. So I don't know what the answer is, but I can't say I think the impact has overall been bad. I think we've gone too far with it in some cases. And I do think there have been, and I did witness hires at the university that you knew they weren't the best candidate. And 8 out of 10 times they didn't work out. So that was expensive too. And you had to go through the whole thing again. So, Patty, what do you think?
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned the female thing. This is going to sound silly, but I was watching a TV show called The Irrational. I love the show. Stars Jesse Martin, and he's a behavioral psychologist, and he helps the police and so forth. And the latest episode, they were attending a magic show, and there was, of course, a killing there that they had to solve. But one of the things he talked about was telling them that they ran a study, and they backed this up with facts. And if you go back and check it out, so it's not just TV magic, but they ran a research study, and they showed a group of people pictures of, or a video of a magic trick, sleight of hand, only showing the hands. And they then asked the people that watched, how good do you think that magician was? Now, in one case, they told him it was a female magician. And in another case, they told them that it was a male magician. And the results were more favorable for the male, much more favorable. But in reality, it was the same magician both times, same person. And that's the unknown bias that some people have that we're not aware of. I was interested in finding if there were any studies on this, and I did come across an article in Forbes magazine. Now, it was published a year ago, but they were discussing the positive and negative effects of DEI. And they said, again, when they put this in 20 years ago, most of the people that did this originally was to make sure that discrimination did not continue because of these unknown biases in the workplace. And they thought, well, after about 10 years, it'll be done. But their conclusions in Forbes was that they actually still are needed. And one of the reasons they cite is that there's an increased job performance, there is reduced turnover in the workplace, and that you have a more diverse workplace. They went to very large companies, and of course, this is different from what Bryan runs. Bryan has a small business, and it would be impossible to include all different ethnicities and religions and so forth in his place. These were large companies, and they found that the positives, they said there was an impact of DEI was positive because it improved the cultural and business and the success in the workplace. There was better problem solving because of the different viewpoints that were brought in. The workers were happier. And, all of these decisions were based on, they based their results on customer satisfaction, employee engagement, innovation, social responsibility, and the financial strength of the company. They also found that DEI is one of the most impactful social initiatives, bringing people together of different backgrounds. And the DEI initiatives enjoyed a broad-based stakeholder support, And they felt that there still was a need for these DEI programs. I keep hearing that the main argument is we're not using meritocracy to make our choices, and that we should be. And we do all want the best and the brightest to be in positions that we need in a company. But unfortunately, there are biases that come into play. And to prevent those biases, give everybody a chance in the working place to do the job and pick the best from that pool. Perhaps there is a medium that we can do between meritocracy and DEI. And that's what should be done so as to keep the standards high in companies and having the best pilot in that plane, as Bryan talked about, but also making sure that that position is open to everyone, whether race, color, or creed, or gender is involved.
I guess my concern would be how, do we lower the standard to increase the pool of candidates so that we can say that we are diverse, inclusive, and and we're following our DEI mission.
Well, I'll respond to that.
Please.
Here's the thing. What we found out was sometimes our minimum standards were too high, and there's this. The notion is that you want to get the best people, but you really should not start your minimum standards higher than they need to be. But that is what happened. And so to increase the pool, you do have to, quote, lower your standards, but you are not asked to make them any lower than what's needed to do the job. But unfortunately, there's a lot of, not very, I'm going to say, scientific, professional hiring that gets done. And so people just say, oh, you have to have a college education to do this job. Probably you don't. There's a lot of jobs right now, and there always have been that, oh, we want someone with a college education. But do you need somebody with a college education? And when you say you have to have a college education, then look how many people you're screening out.
Right.
Yeah. So
I guess for me, when you look at the different skilled professional positions that are out there, and those are the ones that sort of bubble up to the surface with me. And I just feel like, there to be able to do the job efficiently, proficiently, you're not going to kill anybody. This is the standard. This is what you have to do to get into that position. I worry that, an airline might say, you know what, we have too many white male Air Force trained pilots. So what we need to do is, and because those pilots come out with 5, 8, 10,000 hours out of their military service, we need to lower the standard to get a more diverse population, surgeons, things of that nature. Now, I understand that not everybody needs a college education, and I totally agree. I totally agree with what everybody's saying. I just worry that there are certain professions that, in the quest to be more diverse, have, lowered the standard, and it creates a long-term problem, for them. I guess I harp on pilots and stuff. That's, one of the only times I ever put my life in the hands of two people, is when I get on an airplane. And when you go in for surgery, I don't care. I want to make sure he passed and he's the best surgeon out there before he knocks me out and opens me up. I want to make sure that it was rigorous and the training he received was rigorous and it got the best possible results out of him.
And I will, the other thing that's running through my mind is, because then you have to go back to their education, right? Mm-hmm. Are we watering down education?
I've been one that is, Bryan, I agree with you in that I want the best and the brightest in those positions. And Susan mentioned education. I have always said that I wanted the best and the brightest teachers for my children. I didn't care what they looked like, what religion they were. I wanted the best and the brightest. The only thing is with DEI, what you're doing is assuring that you're opening the field of candidates to everyone. Take, for example, this is weird, but my son went to Walsh High School. My grandson is now a freshman there. And originally, Walsh was an all-male school and very exclusive when it originally started. And it was difficult to get in, but they only accepted males. In around 1991 or so, they started bringing in females. Now, they didn't increase the number of students allowed in the school. What they did is they opened it to women. Now, yes, some young boys were cut out of a position because there was a female that scored better on testing and was better qualified. To me, this is the purpose in the end of DEI, that we're making sure that we're giving everyone that fair chance and we're getting the best and the brightest from all of the groups and not excluding one simply because.
I agree 100% with that, 100%. It's just at times these particular initiatives get what I call mission creep.
They do.
They start to they start to go to air. It's like the ivy in my backyard. If I don't cut it back,
Well,
it'll take over the whole thing.
Instead
And
of the means to an ends, they become the ends in some cases. Yeah. They become more important than what we started trying to achieve.
And I wouldn't want anybody to go away with thinking that I would, I want to keep certain people out and this, that, or the other. I just, and if that would be the goal and the overall mission of DEI was to get the best possible pool of people, I'm right there.
Well, there are quite a few large companies now that are stopping or getting rid of their DEI programs. But we just had an executive order by Trump signed yesterday about stopping all the DEI programs in the federal agencies. So it'll be interesting to watch.
I think he said they're not going to get any money for them. I don't know that he went so far to say they can't have them.
Oh,
maybe they're just cutting them back. Cut it back.
He's just not funding them.
Was that what it was? Okay.
Yeah.
Which will, in essence,
will have a big impact. Yes.
I wanted to interject that the definition, defining a job accurately, that is the 6 to 10 actions that need to be performed on a regular basis, very accurately and often, such that you can put a job description together that uses verbs, starts with the action, and therefore there's an outcome. And if you can put together, and this is what we did at Rubbermaid, that moved us so fast in this business of profitability and hiring the right people, is the 8 or 10 actions in the form of a job description, but they're verbs. They begin with a verb, therefore can be measured, and the tools necessary to hire the right people for those jobs.
Well,
that accuracy.
Tom, I think that's going to be our last word for today. We'd like to thank everybody for being on our panel, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
You are watching WCTV, Wadsworth Community Television.